Norman Rockwell, the artist, was an American institution. For many years, he captured slices of Americana, real and imagined. His covers for the Saturday Evening Post and his artwork in other places really described what happened in America. And then in 1964, he did this painting of Ruby Bridges. We talked about this a little briefly in a different module. Race relations is institutionalized in America. There's no question about this. And as I lay down this lecture on the 1st of July in 2020, it seems to me that we're looking to create social change and to reorient this institution of race relations after many years. And we'll see how much change comes about and at what cost and toward what end. As I mentioned here with this fingerprint, it was okay for many years to discriminate against people by race or creed or religion. And it was even possible in the American institution, our society at large, to get away with it without leaving fingerprints. And I think that's changing. I hope it is. I want to talk about manufacturing output. Manufacturing has really changed during the 20th century. As I mentioned a little earlier in this presentation, so much of what America made prior to World War II, we equipped everything, we had everything we needed made right here. From shoes to radios to everything. And then the cost of labor went up with our increasing ability to pay for these things. And then, thanks to Malcolm McLean and others, foreign production became possible. Now remember this, when somebody says Chinese imports, this is not like some Chinese company that is opening its catalogs in the United States. What happened in the late 20th century and what is still happening in the 21st century is American companies are taking their production offshore and they're bringing these products back here to the United States. It's not some foreign company, it's a US company that simply has its production elsewhere. That's the way it works. But what's interesting about this chart is in 1947, 15% of our total economic output was in manufacturing. Now, as we crossed over into the 21st century, it was also just about 15%. What has changed is you see this chart that shows the percentage of the U.S. workforce that's in manufacturing. It went down from about 33 million to nearly 10 million by the time the century was over. That's, of course, that's a product of two things. One, increased productivity and technology. Two, the offshore relocation. So we still have a major sector of our economy that is in manufacturing, but we have fewer employees there. Here's the same slide. Look at it one more time. Manufacturing share of gross domestic product. It has gone down both for the world, again, because of productivity and because of cheaper places to make it. Now, profit is part of everybody's business. Companies make higher profits. What's interesting, and we'll learn this when we go through our section on income and wealth, Americans actually pay less for clothes, electronics, food, houseware, and much more because these goods are imported. Now that's good because our real earnings, as we'll talk about here in a minute, have been stuck for a long time. This is a pretty telling chart. Now, a quintile is simply 1/5 of anything. If there were 20 of you in this class, and I looked at 5 quintiles, I'd have the first 4 people through the door, the second 4, the third 4, fourth, fourth and fifth quintiles. It's just a fifth of anything. That's what a quintile is. This shows wealth, not income, but wealth. Wealth is the accumulated product of earnings or losses, gain in assets. The top quintile, 20%, have 80% of the wealth. All right, this is between 1983 and 2004. The bright blue section represents the top quintile. The second quintile is in sort of the maroon, and they have a share. They have 12.6%, now down to about 11% at the turn of the century. The third, the fourth, and the fifth quintiles together have just about 4% of the total wealth in America. So 96% of the wealth in America is in these top two quintiles. That's a distribution. I just want you to look at that and think about that, and we'll discuss it later. Now I've got some more cheery news here. Mickey Mouse is an American institution. It was a creation of Walt Disney, the great cartoonist and entrepreneur. Disney gave us singing cars and talking mice and all this kind of stuff. It was his imagination that was an important part of institutional America. People went on vacations, they went to Disneyland, they went to Disney World. Newspapers. People used to read newspapers a lot. This graph illustrates that per capita, 40% daily newspaper circulation as a percentage of the population. About 40% read a paper every single day. By the time we got down to 95, it was less and less and less. I remember in 1975, when I was working in Chicago, 75 to 98, I would ride the train to work every day, and I would read the Chicago Sun-Times on the way in and the Chicago Tribune on the way home. Everybody in the train was reading the newspaper. I went up to visit my daughter and her family not long ago. I rode the train downtown. Nobody except me was reading a paper. It is just something that's changed. It's a product of the culture. Us baby boomers are still addicted to newspaper, newsprint. Television. We talked about television in the previous one about technology. I can remember in St. Louis when the second broadcast station came on. At first we just had one, and then the second one came on. We essentially had three, and then eventually we had the educational channel as well. But it was CBS, NBC, and ABC. Those were your choices. So there wasn't reason to get up much and change a dial. In 2008, Nielsen reports Americans are watching 151 hours per month, more than 6 full hours a day. Now, of course, you get your television on all kinds of platforms now. You don't have to sit in the living room watching the big flat screen. Television is an institution. It's both for information and for entertainment and for distraction and all the other stuff, but it is part of institutional America. Now, the Boy Scouts and the Girl Scouts. Boy Scouts, of course, was an import from England. 1910, they brought this program over. I joined the Boy Scouts in 1955 at age 8, and I was in till I was 16 as an Explorer Scout. This is interesting. Now, this is obviously at the end of the 20th century. Nearly 2/3 of Boy Scout troops were sponsored by churches, Mormons, Methodists, Catholics, in that order. And the reason the Boy Scouts and then later the Girl Scouts in 1912, these are programs that are seen as character formation, character building. They are not religious in nature, although both the Boy Scouts and Girl Scouts have religious awards depending on your denomination. The Boy Scouts has the Ad Altare Dei Award. And the Girl Scouts, 1912, founded by Juliet Lowe, taking her example from Lord Baden-Powell. In 1977, a friend of mine asked me to volunteer and help with the Girl Scouts of Chicago. I did, And then about 7 years later, I was president of the council and chairman of the board. We had 20,000 girls and about 6,000 volunteers. It was a very big agency. I served for 2 terms. As it turned out, I was the only man to have been president of the Girl Scouts of Chicago. There were males in other councils. So I understand both programs. As a matter of fact, I'm a lifetime member of the Girl Scouts. Good programs. The programs have, since the dawn of this 21st century, fallen on hard times. Certainly the Boy Scouts have. Disco dancing. This is probably an image thing, probably a trend thing, but to socially dance and to go out with your friends, especially disco dancing in the late 70s, was a real thing. It was a real institution brought about by Travolta and his music. And my friends and I used to do this, and it was great fun. It was a great exercise and a great social event. Now try to get that picture out of your mind. Me disco dancing. There's another of the great experiments was an institution. Religion directed its attention, Women's Christian Temperance Union did, and they said that the problem with alcohol is it destroyed families, it destroyed men, it destroyed their incomes, and through a long crusade, they finally convinced the Congress and 3/4 of the legislature to adopt the 18th Amendment. Well, it seems that alcohol as a social elixir was more institutionalized than temperance was, and this did not go well. And finally, in 1933, 21st Amendment was passed, and people could once again drink. It was interesting, when I came out here to school in 1965, in fact, it was legal for 18-year-olds to drink, but only 3.2 beer, sort of near beer. There were a couple of taverns here in town. The guys would all buy pitchers of beer. Some would get drunk, I guess. They had enough alcohol in their system. And yet, in Kansas, it was a leader in the Drive movement. In Kansas in 1965 through about 75, you could not go to a bar and order a drink. Now, you could belong to a private club. Those were fictions, but Kansas was very, very strict about that until just recently, late in the 20th century. Miss America. What in the world does Miss America have to do with political history? Miss America was developed in 1920 in Atlantic City. And basically it was just Atlantic City looking to promote its tourism. And so they had these pretty girls walk around in swimsuits, and people came and they visited. And this is one of America's most dubious contributions to society. It is an institution that has morphed into Mrs. America and Miss Universe and all this sort of thing. I always ask the question, if it is a scholarship competition, then why is there an evening gown competition and swimsuit? Why not academic garb? Here's Miss America 1947, Barbara Jo Walker, and there has only been one Jewish Miss America, Bess Meyerson, in 1945. So there you go, Miss America, an American institution. Now here's another American institution, seems to be making a small comeback, the drive-in theater. 1941, there were about 65 of them, and of course, once the war was over, there were thousands. There were 4,000 in 1958. I do remember going with my family, with my friends, to drive-in theaters. It was a great social event. You got to sit there and kibitz and have your concessions and not be distracted by other people around. By 1999, there were just 447. I guess there are still some here, but not too many. Here's an institution that came and went, I guess. Now, Al Jolson. I talked about Al Jolson before. Al Jolson headlined this first full talking motion picture. The interesting thing about the movies going to talkies is there was a big debate about who should bear the cost. Should the movie producers bear the cost, or should the theater owners bear the cost of buying the equipment, to show talkie movies. The same thing happened when 3D came back. The same thing happened when movies, of course, in the last 10 years, went digital. Who could afford these digital projectors? Now, it used to be that the movies spent maybe a third of their total production budget in making actual physical prints, films, to send around from theater to theater. As many as 4,000 screens would have first-run movies. Now they just send them around via satellite. It's a pretty amazing business, and it has changed quite a bit. And they still want you in the theaters once we get over the COVID-19 thing. So, institutions provide stability. They give us a level of civilization. When economics or laws come in, they change institutions like prohibition. One mistake we sometimes commit is being loyal when an institution should change for the common good. There are times we should cast them off or change them. Wisdom comes in knowing when to do one and not the other.